Blake Shelton has always been the kind of country star who wears his heart on his sleeve. Fans have followed his journey from small-town Oklahoma to the biggest stages in music, cheering him on through triumphs and heartbreaks. But nothing captured public attention quite like his whirlwind romance with Gwen Stefani. For years, they were Hollywood's favorite unlikely couple. He, the down-to-earth country boy, and she, the pop-rock goddess with a style all her own. Their love story seemed like something pulled straight from the lyrics of a song. Unexpected, passionate, and full of second chances. Yet behind the headlines and the red carpet smiles, cracks began to show. When their relationship ended, Blake was left facing a reality he never expected: life without Gwen. This heartbreak wasn't just another chapter in his personal life. It reshaped his music, his outlook, and the way fans would forever see him. When Blake Shelton and Gwen Stefani first went public with their relationship in 2015, few people could have predicted just how much their love story would capture the world's attention. Blake was freshly divorced from fellow country singer Miranda Lambert, a relationship that had defined much of his public life for nearly a decade. Gwen, on the other hand, was reeling from her own heartbreak. The end of her marriage to Gavin Rossdale, frontman of the rock band Bush. Both were vulnerable, wounded, and uncertain about the future. And yet, in the midst of their personal storms, they found each other. Their romance began quietly on the set of The Voice, where both served as coaches. Initially, many dismissed it as a rebound or even a publicity stunt. After all, how could two stars from such different worlds, one rooted in Oklahoma country music, the other a global pop icon, truly connect? But time proved the skeptics wrong. Blake and Gwen weren't just a headline-making couple. They were a pair who seemed to genuinely heal one another's scars. Blake often spoke about Gwen being his anchor during some of his darkest days. He described her as someone who brought light back into his life when everything felt heavy. Fans noticed how his music shifted too. His songs began reflecting themes of hope, second chances, and unexpected love. Similarly, Gwen credited Blake with restoring her faith in love after what she described as one of the most painful betrayals of her life. Together, they created a love story that resonated with millions who had also endured heartbreak but still dared to believe in new beginnings. Their public appearances were always full of affection and joy. Whether it was red carpet events, televised performances, or playful banter on The Voice, Blake and Gwen radiated chemistry. For years, they were a symbol of resilience, proving that love can bloom in the most unlikely places and at the most unexpected times. Fans from both sides of the music world rallied behind them, treating their relationship as a beacon of hope that love could survive even after devastating loss. When they married in July 2021 at Blake's Oklahoma ranch, it felt like the culmination of their journey. The wedding was intimate, attended by close friends and family, and symbolized not just a union of two people, but also of two very different worlds. Gwen's glamorous California roots met Blake's down-to-earth country lifestyle, and for a time, it seemed like they had found the perfect balance. But as with so many relationships under the spotlight, the fairy tale began to fade. Rumors of tension circulated, with tabloids suggesting everything from career pressures to lifestyle differences. Blake thrived in the simplicity of Oklahoma, enjoying the quiet life away from the flashing cameras. Gwen, meanwhile, remained deeply connected to Los Angeles, her fashion career, and her roots in the pop-rock scene. The distance between their lifestyles began to reflect a deeper emotional gap. What made their love so inspiring was also what made it so fragile. They had come together out of shared pain, but as time moved forward, they began facing the challenges of blending two worlds that weren't always in sync. Fans who once celebrated their love story now worried about its fragility, sensing that the couple who once seemed inseparable might be quietly drifting apart. For Blake, of his life was about more than falling in love. It was about rediscovering himself. His relationship with Gwen showed him new sides of life, fame, and vulnerability, but it also planted the seeds of a heartbreak that would eventually shape the man he would become in the years after their split. For the longest time, Blake Shelton and Gwen Stefani's love story seemed untouchable. the kind of romance that made people believe in destiny. But behind the smiles, duets, and red carpet appearances, there were subtle cracks forming in the foundation of their marriage. To many fans, these signs were invisible at first, hidden beneath carefully chosen words and glowing public appearances. Yet, as time went on, the differences between Blake and Gwen became harder to ignore. Blake had always been a man of the land. Raised in Oklahoma, he cherished simplicity. Fishing, hunting, long drives through backcountry roads, and the kind of small-town life where everyone knows your name. For him, fame was never the goal. It was simply the byproduct of doing what he loved, making music. Gwen, on the other hand, was deeply rooted in California culture. Her life revolved around fashion, big city energy, and the fast pace of the entertainment industry. She thrived in the spotlight and found inspiration in the hustle and creativity of Los Angeles. At first, these differences balanced one another out. Gwen adored the quiet life on Blake's ranch, where she often shared photos of her children enjoying farm animals and country sunsets. Blake, meanwhile, found himself enchanted by Gwen's bold style and her ability to light up a room with her presence. But as time passed, their lifestyles didn't just contrast, they began to clash. Blake preferred staying home in Oklahoma, far from Hollywood, while Gwen felt pulled back to the city where her career and roots lay. Adding to the strain were their demanding schedules. Blake continued touring and working on music, while Gwen balanced her fashion line and occasional Las Vegas residency performances. The travel, the long separations, and the pressure of constantly being in the public eye weighed heavily on their marriage. Rumors began swirling, with tabloids hinting that Blake's desire for a quieter life conflicted with Gwen's need to remain at the center of entertainment and fashion. Though both often denied such stories, there was an undeniable tension in the air. Another challenge was the blending of their families. Gwen had 3 children from her previous marriage, and while Blake stepped into a stepfather role with genuine love and dedication, it wasn't always easy. Navigating co-parenting dynamics and balancing the responsibilities of fame with private family life became more complicated as the years went on. Blake, who had never had children of his own, found himself adjusting to a role that was both rewarding and overwhelming. By the time whispers of trouble began to circulate more frequently, fans noticed that Blake and Gwen were appearing together less often than before. The playful chemistry that once defined their relationship seemed subdued, replaced by careful words and a noticeable distance during interviews. While neither publicly addressed these changes at first, insiders claimed that the couple was struggling to find common ground. For Blake, this was a heartbreaking realization. The woman who had once brought healing and joy into his life was now becoming part of a new struggle, a struggle of balance, sacrifice, and compromise that neither of them seemed fully prepared for. It wasn't a question of love. That much was clear. They cared deeply for one another. But sometimes, love alone isn't enough to overcome the realities of 2 vastly different lives. This period marked the beginning of Blake's quiet heartbreak, a time when he began to realize that the fairy tale love story that had once saved him might also be the one that left him facing loneliness again. It was a slow unraveling, one that would eventually lead to one of the most difficult chapters of his life. When the final curtain fell on Blake Shelton and Gwen Stefani's relationship, it wasn't just the end of a romance, it was the unraveling of a chapter that had defined much of Blake's recent life. The split left him facing a silence he hadn't experienced in years. For a man who had always leaned on music to express his emotions, the heartbreak was overwhelming. Fans noticed that Blake, usually so open and cheerful, became more private, retreating into himself as he tried to process the loss. For Blake, the end wasn't simply about saying goodbye to Gwen. It was about letting go of the idea of a future they had built together. Holidays as a family, long summers on the ranch, and the shared dream of blending their worlds into one. In interviews that followed, Blake carefully avoided diving too deeply into the details, but his eyes often told a story of pain that words couldn't capture. Those close to him revealed that he spent more time alone on his Oklahoma ranch, surrounding himself with nature as a form of therapy. The ranch became more than just a home. It became his refuge. Fishing at dawn, working with the land, and spending time with his animals gave him a sense of peace. Friends described him as a man rediscovering himself, leaning into the stillness that had always comforted him before fame and heartbreak complicated his life. While music had once been his greatest outlet, for a time Blake struggled to write. Every melody reminded him of Gwen, every lyric seemed to echo their story, and the weight of those memories made it difficult to create. But Blake was not without support. His close circle of friends and fellow country musicians rallied around him, reminding him that heartbreak, though painful, often fuels some of the greatest songs ever written. Slowly, Blake began returning to the studio, channeling his emotions into music that carried the rawness of his experiences. Fans who heard these new projects described them as some of his most personal work, a window into the soul of a man learning to move forward. Blake also leaned heavily on his family. His mother, Dorothy, remained a grounding presence, offering wisdom and comfort in a way only a mother could. Those who knew Blake said his mother's influence was instrumental in helping him rebuild his sense of self. She reminded him of his roots, of the boy who once picked up a guitar in Oklahoma and dreamed of nothing more than making music that touched people's hearts. Even through the pain, Blake never spoke ill of Gwen. Instead, he carried himself with quiet dignity, focusing on gratitude for the years they shared rather than bitterness about how it ended. This choice not only reflected his character, but also endeared him further to fans who admired his humility. For Blake, healing wasn't about forgetting Gwen. It was about finding a way to honor the love they had while still allowing himself to move on. During this period, Blake also began reconnecting with fans in a more personal way. His concerts became more emotional, with fans noting the vulnerability in his performances. Songs that once felt like casual hits now carried new layers of meaning, and audiences could sense the real pain behind his voice. For Blake, the stage became a place of both release and rebirth, where he could share his story without needing to explain it in words. His life, though filled with heartbreak, was also one of rebuilding. It reminded Blake of the strength he carried within himself, a strength forged from years of personal and professional battles. Slowly but surely, he began piecing himself back together, not as half of a power couple, but as Blake Shelton, the man, the musician, and the survivor of love lost. Heartbreak has a way of reshaping people, and for Blake Shelton, the end of his relationship with Gwen Stefani became both a devastating blow and an unexpected turning point. Though the split left him wounded, it also forced him to reevaluate his life, his priorities, his future, and even his music. Out of that pain came a new beginning, one that reminded both Blake and his fans that love lost doesn't always mean hope is gone. After the breakup, Blake began pouring his heart into writing again. Songs that once celebrated joy now reflected honesty, loss, and lessons learned. He discovered that his heartbreak connected him even more deeply with fans, many of whom saw their own struggles mirrored in his lyrics. What might have seemed like personal devastation at first was transformed into art that resonated on a universal level. For Blake, this wasn't just about making music, it was about survival, healing, and rediscovering his voice in the most authentic way possible. Beyond the music, Blake also embraced the importance of slowing down. Years of living under the spotlight, juggling a demanding career with a very public romance, had taken a toll. The solitude of his Oklahoma ranch became a sanctuary, allowing him to reconnect with his roots. He leaned into the simple things, working the land, cooking meals at home, and enjoying quiet evenings. These moments, though far from the glitz of Hollywood, grounded him and reminded him of who he was long before fame entered the picture. But Blake's story didn't stop at rebuilding himself. It also became about opening his heart again, cautiously but courageously. While he has remained private about the details, whispers within the industry suggest that Blake hasn't entirely closed the door on love. His journey showed him that even the deepest heartbreak doesn't have to define the rest of one's life. Fans admire him for his resilience, for showing that it's possible to grieve and still believe in the possibility of new beginnings. What truly set Blake apart during this time was his grace. Rather than fueling the tabloid machine with bitterness or blame, he chose to remain respectful toward Gwen. He acknowledged the love they shared and the memories they built, even as he accepted that their paths had diverged. That dignity not only protected his own healing, but also preserved the bond he had with his audience, who saw in him a man handling heartbreak with rare humility. In many ways, Blake Shelton's life after Gwen Stefani is less about loss and more about transformation. It's about a man who faced the worst kind of heartache and emerged not weaker but stronger, more self-aware, and more connected to the music and the fans who have always stood by him. His journey reminds us all that heartbreak, while painful, can also be the soil where resilience and hope grow. As Blake looks ahead, he carries with him the scars of love lost, but also the wisdom it brought. His story is no longer just about being one half of a star-studded couple. It's about Blake Shelton reclaiming his life, his voice, and his heart. For fans, it's proof that even when love ends, the story isn't over. Instead, it can mark the beginning of something new, something even more authentic, and perhaps something even more beautiful.